So you just bought your first camera, or you have your camera for years, but the dial on top is still in auto. But now you're ready to explore how a camera actually works and start photographing manually, or at least know the basics why your camera is doing something that you don't want to. Let's go to 100th of a second f11 because we want everything to be sharp, all the way open, so there's a lot of light coming through. F1, the background is totally blown out. F4, we start to see some trees. There are just 3 things you need to know how a camera works, and that's shutter speed, aperture and ISO. And if you know how they work and how they affect each other, you are a master in photography, on the way to become the master. The first easy thing that you should know is how does your shutter speed work. For that, I'm gonna put the camera in S for this one, and it's the S from shutter speed. I got my camera set up in portrait orientation to photograph a small cascade here in the landscape. And for the first practice, I want to have the droplets of this cascade super frozen into the picture. So I want to have a shutter speed that's super high, so it looks like we can freeze time. Go get your camera and follow along with me. You can do this at home. Open up the tap water or something and start taking photos of this water. So I will wait a little bit to when you get your camera. Let's dive in and start shooting. So here on the back of the screen we got 1/40th of a second. That's our shutter speed. So the higher this number goes, the faster that our shutter speed is gonna go. 250th of a second is a good point to start for moving subjects. You can increase your shutter speed from there or decrease if you want to go lower in shutter speed. And you can see on the back of the screen at 250th of a second the shutter speed is not fast enough because the water still got a little bit of movement in it. So that means the water is moving faster than 250th of a second. So we are gonna shoot another picture. We are at 500th of a second now, so we doubled the 250 of a second. And we still got a little bit of movement, you can see it in the water. Shutter speed is something that I always compare like opening up the curtains. So if you really fast open and close the curtains, we just saw a glimpse. So it actually stood still at that second we opened and closed the curtain. But if we're gonna open up the curtain for a longer period of time, we're gonna see things moving. And that's the same with our shutter speed. If we're gonna slow down our shutter speed, so we open up the curtains, open up our shutter speed a little bit longer, there's more light coming onto the sensor, so there's gonna be more movement in the picture. When there's movement in the picture, of course. Now with the water, we're gonna slow down our shutter speed, and you're gonna see that you're gonna see that the water starts moving. You're gonna see more movement in the picture if we open up our shutter speed for longer, and not like we're doing now. 500th of a second is like whoosha! We open and close the curtain, so it's like a fraction that we saw something. Let's go to 100th of a second, and you can see we already are getting way more motion in this picture. There's also a little bit of things that are blown out because there's too much light coming in, and that's the sensor that's not exposing correctly for the environment. That's why I want to teach you how to photograph manually so you can overcome that. So now we're gonna decrease some more. So now I decreased our shutter speed to 1/20th of a second, and we can see now there's way more motion in this water. Let's do this again. 1/20th. Let's go to maybe 1 second. We're getting closer to those professional photos where the water is super smooth in the picture, where it's like almost misty and some water landscapes. So let's do one more, a little bit slower now. I'll put the camera at 3 seconds. It's going to be overexposed a little bit, but it's just for demonstrating purposes that we're doing this. Also, the bottom of this picture is starting to move, so that's super cool. When we decrease our shutter speed, everything gets in motion except the things that are not moving, of course. So if there would be wind, the leaves in the picture, or the ferns on the right side in this picture, they also would be starting to get motion in them, because we're decreasing our shutter speed. So we're opening up our shutter speed, we're gonna let more light in, and we're gonna take more time to get that info onto the sensor. So if the leaves are starting to move, the leaves will get blurry into this picture. Now I want to talk about aperture. Aperture is the depth of field in your picture. So if something's very close, you can make the background blurry to make it stand out even more. Or maybe like in landscape photography, you want a big scene and you want everything to be sharp. So now to understand the aperture, we're gonna put our camera in A. If we're photographing at f1.8, that will be like this. The lens is all the way open, so there's a lot of light coming through, but also our depth of field is super shallow. So there's a super small part of our picture that is in focus. It depends on how far your subject is, of course, but if we put the subject super close to the lens, the subject is almost going to be out of focus also, because the depth of field is so shallow. But if we increase our depth of field, the lens will close up a little bit more and more till f16, this lens. So this is f16. There's almost no light coming through this lens because the hole is super small. So I'm gonna show you with this small subject here in the landscape. So now that we're in aperture priority mode, the A from aperture, we're only gonna change our f number. So first I'm gonna go down to f1.8. If you're photographing with a kit lens, you probably are at 3.5 or something, but it doesn't matter. It's just for me to exaggerate what's gonna happen. We're gonna take the photo. Like you can see in this picture, there's not a lot of focus in this picture. Everything is blown out. Even our subject is almost not in focus because we're photographing at such a low f number. So you have to remind yourself, when the number is small, I don't have a lot in focus, but when the number is big, there's more in focus. Let's say we are at the kit lens, f3.5. Our subject is already a little bit more into focus, so we can see more of our subject because the f number is increased. So we're gonna do that again. We're gonna increase our f number again and see what else is back in focus. Let's go to 6.3. Not only our subject is in focus, but also the background starts to get a little bit more into focus. So you can see small f number, a small focus point or small focus line in the picture. When we increase our aperture or f number, the more we get in focus into the picture. So let's move again and get that aperture up more, f9. So again, we can see on the left side of our picture, there's a little bit more focus. When we swap the photos with the previous one and this one, you can see there's a little bit more detail in the background of this picture. So that's great. So we're gonna move up again with our aperture. Let's go to f16 is the biggest I can go with this lens. From the f1, this photo, to the f16, what a difference it is to increase that f number or play with that f number. So if you can combine our shutter speed and that f number, you can start playing with those two elements. But first, quickly, we're going to learn about ISO, the third element of our photography journey into the manual mode. So now for the next test or the next assignment, I've changed lenses. I've put on the Sigma 18-35, so it's a little bit closer to that standard kit lens that comes with the camera, the 18-55. But this lens goes to f2.8, but that doesn't matter in this scenario because we're gonna only change the ISO and see what that's gonna do. So the ISO works a little bit similar with the numbers like our shutter speed and our aperture. The lower the number, the less sensitive the sensor is for light. So if we're gonna increase the ISO number, if we're gonna go 2000, we're gonna say to the sensor, you have to be super sensitive to light. So like if you see something from light, oh, you're gonna catch it. But if you're gonna decrease it to 100, it's gonna say, okay, I can handle that light. Try this assignment with me to learn how ISO is working. I've put the camera already in manual mode. We're already there because there isn't a real setting just to change the ISO number. There's only like for the shutter speed and aperture priority. I got a nice composition set here. We got that small river flowing through this composition, manual mode. And we are at f11 because we're shooting landscapes. We can shoot at f11 because we want everything to be sharp. It's a fifth of a second because that's an okay shutter speed, because we're having a lot of highlights here on the trees because the sun is shining really hard. But we also got a lot of darks here, a lot of dark shadows here. But the most important is we are at ISO 100 here. I'm gonna take the picture because we already dialed in like this. It's pretty nice. We got some, you see the RGB flashing, so we got some highlights here and there that are overexposed. So my camera is telling me I should increase our shutter speed, but we're playing around with the ISO. I'm going to increase the ISO, so ISO at 200, f11, fifth of a second. I'm going to take the same photo. We're starting to get more details here in the shadows. You see the picture's getting lighter. Let's go to 400. You already see we got a lot more blinking, so we're getting more overexposed parts in this picture. Even here in the foreground we got overexposed grasses, but we're starting to see more details here in this landscape. Let's go to 800 and even more blinking, because we're overexposing our picture. So if we decrease our ISO, it will go back to a less overexposed photo. See, we have less blinking, a little bit here in the foreground, but in the previous photo here we got a lot of blinking parts. It's overexposed. All that info is lost. So I hope that was a little bit clear how the ISO is affecting our images. If we bump it up, the more sensitive the sensor is, even on the same shutter speed, it's going to collect more light. The lower the number, the less sensitive the sensor is. And now, with knowing how to use our shutter speed, how the aperture works, and how the ISO works, every time in manual mode we change one of them, it's going to affect the other one. We're going to photograph the landscape here, and I'm going to try to show you when I change something. We're going to see what it's doing to our picture. I've made a different composition, still in portrait orientation, but now we're going to do the three elements together. So I'm photographing in between those trees. It's like a nice leading a line into this frame that I'm photographing. So nothing spectacular, because it's not a spectacular moment to photograph in the landscape because the sun is too hard. So we're still at ISO 250, fifth of a second at f11, and we're gonna see what's happening. Highlights overexposed. So there are a few things we can do to change our highlights. In this composition, there's no need for slow shutter speeds. So we can increase our shutter speed. So let's do that. So I'm gonna increase our shutter speed to 50 of a second. There's a lot of the picture is underexposed now, and I could have changed my ISO, what would be a normal thing to do, but I've changed my shutter speed because there's nothing that's gonna change or move. So there's no fast passing cars, there's no water that's flowing that I want to have in with the slower shutter speed. So my shutter speed doesn't matter what I've changed it to. But now, with bumping up my shutter speed, my shutter was super fast, so my curtains were faster, so there was less light coming onto the sensor. In landscape photography, I would say we don't want that. We want to have our ISO lower. So we're gonna go back to fifth of a second, and we're gonna bring down our ISO ISO at 100. So we're gonna take the photo again. ISO 100, fifth of a second. We got some highlights on the trees and here on the foreground that are still blinking, so it's still overexposed. So dropping to ISO 100 isn't enough. There are two things now that we can change to make that overexposed parts go away. So we can increase our shutter speed, or we can increase our aperture. So we are now at f11, everything is sharp in the picture, but if we change it to f16, we have more in focus. So I'm gonna take the photo, and now my photo is almost perfect at f16. So with the f16, we're letting less light come into the lens. So this less light coming onto the sensor. So that's one solution to get rid of that highlight. But we still have some highlights, and I'm like, f16 is already pretty far for almost every photography. So the thing what we can do now is maybe bump up our shutter speed to 10th of a second. Our exposure is correctly, but now with the harsh light we still got some pretty hard shadows. But that's something we can bring back in post-processing, because I'm photographing around. Rewatch the video, try it with your camera in the hands, try those things that I just showed you, and after a while you will get the hang out of it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.